Welcome back to the Show Sleuth podcast, where we as detectives break down new episodes of popular TV shows and other media. I'm your host, Ben, and today is part 3 of our coverage of the Apple TV show Sunny. So if you guys haven't already listened to episode 1 or 2 of our podcast, I recommend giving those a listen so you're caught up on the story. We are in for a spicy episode number 3 in the show so far. I really enjoyed this week's episode, and just a note for our younger listeners, there are some more adult themes in this episode than we've seen in the show so far. But before we get into this episode's breakdown, I just want to take a moment to thank each of the listeners for showing so much support on the first 2 podcast episodes, and to let you guys know that our first Patreon exclusive series is going to be releasing next week. It's called The Binge, where I challenge myself to watch the entirety of a new season of a show in less than 24 hours. I'll be recording myself reacting to bits and pieces of the episode, as well as giving a brief synopsis of each one, before ultimately giving you my entire take on the show and whether or not it's worth your time. This first episode of The Binge is going to be covering Those About to Die, which is a new Gladiator style show releasing on Netflix on July 18th. So if you guys want to check out this exclusive series that's only for Patreon members, you can sign up for just $5 a month on the link below in the description. Thank you for choosing to support our podcast. All right, now before we continue into this week's episode, I want to give a major spoiler warning. As always, if you're new to the podcast, we're going to be going through a detailed synopsis of this week's episode. So if you haven't seen it yet and you wish to do so, please pause the podcast now and come back and see us to join the discussion when you're done. One last thing that I wanted to bring to attention for the listeners is in episode 1 of the podcast, I made a connection to the movie I, Robot to demonstrate the similarities in this general theme of not trusting robots and humanity's aversion to robots becoming integrated into our society. Well, it dawned on me this week that the robot in that movie is also named Sunny, although it is spelled Sonny, and it made me chuckle, and I couldn't help but draw that connection even closer to this new show, Sunny, because it was all about a special robot that had different programming that was meant to like save humanity. I don't know. For anybody that's seen the movie and is also watching along in the show, I just thought that was a nice little tie-in. I don't know if they drew inspiration from the movie or if it's just coincidence, but I couldn't believe it once my brain realized that that was the case. We opened this week's episode on a eerie scene where a woman who, quite honestly, looks a little bit menacing, is at a nail salon in the middle of the night. And in the background, we hear muffled bangs and a man screaming. While we don't know this new character's name, you can tell that the environment is hostile and the woman who owns the nail salon is clearly uncomfortable by this late night visit. There's an interesting dichotomy of a man getting presumably tortured and beat in the back room while they have this pleasant exchange in the front. The host obviously afraid of what's happening right now, but being very respectful to the mysterious woman. As they continue to exchange pleasantries, the nail salon owner asks the mysterious woman how their father is doing, to which they respond, same old stubborn bull, trying to take calls and work from the hospital. And my major theory right now is that this is some crime boss, some underworld leader who is sick or in the hospital, and then this is their daughter who's now kind of taking up the reins and seeing their father's work out. The nail salon owner apologizes to the woman for having to come back so soon, which leads us to believe that this is a business she frequents. But before they continue with whatever they're doing, things in the back are getting too loud with the man screaming, and so the mysterious woman stands up and goes to figure out what's going on, where we see a grim scene of a man indeed being tortured and insisting that he doesn't know anything. The mysterious woman then says, let's hurry this up, get it over with, and the guys that are attacking this man pull out a drill. It's not a great situation. She returns to her business, sitting down and apologizing, asking where were they, and the nail salon owner pulls out a box to reveal a fake pinky with an ornate nail design on it. The mysterious woman loves it and raves about her skill and artistry before sliding it on a stump of a finger that they have on their hand. I forgot to mention that she said the reason she was back so soon is some mishap at work, so I thought this was a nail appointment and it ended up being something a little bit more sinister and creepy. But that's all we get before we roll into the opening intro credit sequence. We then cut forward to an interaction between the spy that we've been following in the first 2 episodes and his robot as they're watching Susie and Sunny inside of their home. The spy asks the robot if there's been any movement, and the robot says no, not yet. They haven't left their room for weeks. And remember that this is coming off of the revelation from the previous episode that Masa was more than likely on the plane at the time of the crash because they had the shoes delivered. Of course, as the viewer, we know that these shoes were delivered by this spy and robot and was more than likely manufactured and not something that actually happened. But Susie doesn't know that, and she's going through a really, really tough time. On the contrary, Noriko, Susie's mother-in-law, has seemed to take this shoe delivery as a sign that Masa's fate has been sealed and he must be dead, and is seen here in the next shot making funeral arrangements. Noriko has some friends over at their home when they are on the phone making funeral plans, and we learn in this scene that they've been delaying the funeral as long as possible due to the fact that Susie has not come to grips with the fact that Masa is dead and isn't ready to move forward until she has confirmation about her son also. We also get a glimpse at the Japanese culture, at least within this show, at how important these funerals are, as her friends remark that Masa will finally be able to rest once they hold a traditional funeral for him. Noriko learned on the phone if they wanted to hold the funeral at a temple that they were going to have to delay yet again due to some circumstance with the priest, but her friends tell her that due to some circumstances that they had in place beforehand, they would not be able to attend if she delays anymore. This ultimately leads Noriko to decide that they're going to have the funeral that week at her home. We cut to Susie's house where Sunny is watching something on the projector screen when Noriko calls to inform them of the decision. Sunny reports to Noriko that Susie has been a total shut-in for 2 weeks and is in a grieving process of her own. She agrees to relay a message to Susie if Susie ever comes out of the room. And while Noriko's moving through her house on the phone call, she actually has a flashback of her own to the time that Masa lived with her and was in Hikikomori, which, as a reminder, is when people in Japan seclude themselves from society and become hermits. It's probably Susie's behavior here as she's grieving the death of her husband that reminds her of the time where she barely got to see Masa. In the flashback, we see Noriko come with a platter of food outside the door of where Masa is staying and pleads and begs for him to come out, and she won't even speak to him. She just wants to change his bed sheets before ultimately giving up and leaving the food on the floor. She sneaks away to watch from down the hall when Masa reluctantly gets up, opens the door, grabs the food, and then goes back into his room immediately. We can see he's wearing pajamas and has long hair, and it was cool to get a glimpse of what that process looked like. Side note, sign me up, man. This guy is living the life. He's got his mom bringing him pizza rolls. He's probably playing World of Warcraft while he's working. Listen, I'm just saying, I'm into it. Not pleased with how the phone call went, Noriko decides to go visit Susie in person. Of course, she never really makes it in through the front door and rather just hands some packages to Sunny for Susie. One is a necklace, a pearl necklace that used to belong to Noriko's mother that she insists Susie must wear at the funeral, which is happening tomorrow. Sunny tries to tell Noriko that Susie is not going to be down for this and not going to accept the funeral happening. And this is when Noriko hands them a wrapped gift and says, please also give this to Susie. She's been asking about it. The two go back and forth on how Susie's not ready, but that Noriko says they can't wait any longer and that there's tradition for a reason, with Noriko acknowledging the pain that Susie must be going through to have not only lost her husband, but also losing her son, as Noriko is also obviously a mom to Masa. She can relate to that pain and understands that Susie would like to wait to know what Zen's fate ended up being as well. Sunny goes off to find Susie, who we see laying on the floor, smelling presumably Zen's clothing and crying, to inform her of her mother-in-law's visit. Susie is obviously very upset about the funeral and is unwilling to go, but then gets handed the strange gift from Noriko. And this moment is really what kicks off this episode and sends our main character on their journey. We unwrap the gift and see that it is the original three-tailed wolf drawing that Masa made when he was in Hikikomori. The same symbol we've seen on the assistant from the robot shop who had it tattooed on their body, as well as the symbol the viewer sees in the flashback to the moment in the yellow room when Masa signs off on his laptop. As a reminder, this is the symbol for the person that wrote the dark manual and created code for people to be able to hack into robots. Receiving this drawing is all but confirmation to Susie that Masa was indeed at least involved in some capacity with the dark manual and the robots, but raises some questions for me about Noriko, who had insisted and told Susie that she had thrown that drawing away, and yet it's here now in this scene. So she either dug it up in the trash, or I don't know. She insisted that she wouldn't be able to find it, that she didn't know what she did with it, and now is presenting it as a gift to Susie. But what this effectively does is snap Susie out of her grieving that she's been going through for 2 weeks now since receiving Masa's shoes, and reignites the passion and fire for her to understand what was really happening with her husband and get to the bottom of things. When Susie takes a picture of the drawing and uploads it to the internet, it's kind of like Not that this has ever happened to me, of course, but if you've ever seen in movies when someone downloads a virus and it starts doing all these pop-ups on their computer of like, you know, explicit websites and other viruses, that's what happens on her projector screen when she enters it into the search. So we get all these ads for like robot sex and robot violence and all these things that the Dark Manual unlocks, as well as a link to get the Dark Manual itself, which is presumably a scam, but hopefully that paints a picture for this scene, because I remember chuckling to myself when this happened. And just further confirmation that this symbol is definitely associated with the Dark Manual. We also get a very chilling line from Sunny and a cool moment during this scene where she sees how Susie is reacting to all these spam messages and the robot violence specifically, and says, "You know I would never hurt you, right, Susie?" And that if she wanted to hurt Susie, she would have already done so. And then she quickly realizes that was like the wrong thing to say because it sounded menacing as hell. Obviously more concerning for us as the viewer, as we've seen what Sunny has potentially done in the Yellow Room in episodes 1 and 2. So for the first time in weeks, Susie and Sunny decide to leave the house. They are off on a mission where Susie gets the idea to go and visit Mixie from episode 1. The Mixie that I still don't trust entirely, although this episode does kind of change how I feel about that character. As they're leaving the house, they turn a corner and pass by a seemingly innocent enough older man by a truck, who we then later go on to see is tailing Susie. They're working with some spy organization, the one that we've been following for the last 2 episodes, and are sat there to specifically watch for any movement and then notify the spy. And this moment kind of just like brings me out of the drama a little bit, because he literally gets to the truck as soon as they pass him and starts slowly driving behind them as they're walking down the main street. And I just feel like most people would maybe pick up on that. I don't know. I mean, in the modern day and age with smartphones and headphones, maybe you're so locked in on whatever it is that you're doing, you don't notice your surroundings. But I mean, he's literally almost like a cartoon, just slowly creeping behind them in the truck, 20 feet behind them. I don't know. It just was like kind of funny. Mixie is busy at work and the bar is not open yet. So the boss is not too pleased that Mixie is having a conversation with Susie and continues to urge them to please return back to work, ultimately leading their conversation short. But Susie does get to confront Mixie and admits to her that she's not broken up with her husband, that he actually was on the plane crash shortly before Christmas, and that he is dead and she's grieving, which was enough information to get Mixie to agree to come to Susie's house later after work. She asks for her address and says, "I'll come by," so that they can continue the conversation. We cut from the bar to find Noriko late at night in her home on the phone with a long list of people that she is inviting to the funeral, which is the next day, now that it's taking place at her home. After checking off her guest list, we get this sad moment where she tries to call what I think is Masa, but it says call in Japanese, and then in English it says do not answer. That's what she tells to the phone before it starts ringing. And after it rings once or twice, she kind of has this panicky moment and hangs up and is sad. So I assumed that this was Masa that she was trying to call, still coming to grips with the fact that he's dead and trying to accept that. In the next scene, we have Susie and Mixie back at home discussing the 3-tailed wolf symbol, to which Mixie admits she has seen it and that it was on the little package of code that she got with her own homebot. Susie has a moment of self-pity where she's upset that her lifestyle has been afforded by robot sex and violence. Probably the moment that made me laugh the most in this week's episode was that Sunny was in the kitchen preparing some food for the two of them when Mixie asked about Sunny. She says, "What about the robot? Can't you just get rid of it?" And Sunny, with her robot hearing, heard that in the kitchen and sighs and under her breath goes, "Ugh, bitch." And then decides to throw away the eggs that she was preparing for Mixie and Susie, and claims that there's only enough food for Susie, who ultimately needs the calories more than Mixie. She even tosses a packet of crickets at her. And there's another exchange, which is funny, where Mixie tastes the egg because Susie's like, "No, it's fine. We'll still share." And it's like, so good. And then looks at Sunny and says, "Is Susie on a low sodium diet?" To which Sunny responds with, "Salt is the silent killer. I'd be happy to get you some soy sauce." So Mixie and Sunny are right at it and going back and forth in this scene. And it was pretty humorous. It's cool to see Sunny's personality continue to develop. We did learn in episode 2 that she's constantly updating, but to see her connection with Susie strengthening. And also her personality of her own come out is a really cool development in her character arc for the show. Susie is still obsessed with the idea of finding some proof that Masa was involved and what exactly the role of the three-tailed wolf symbol has in all of this, and asks Mixie, since she has a code dealer and has used code from the Dark Manual before, if she could point her in the right direction to start getting some answers. Similar to the reaction that the man who worked at the robot shop had, Mixie is very cautious about trying to pursue more information and states that the code she used was just merely the tip of the iceberg and that the Dark Manual was dangerous. Susie's reaction to Mixie's reservation is to defeatedly give up and start making preparations for her husband's funeral tomorrow, which prompts Mixie to say, okay, listen, I did get my code from this guy I knew from middle school. And Susie lights up immediately and is like, let's go see him. Like right. And she's like, right now? Yes, right now. And they like get up and go on their way to go meet this guy. His name is Takumi, and he is seen working at an adult toy store, but is also the same man that we saw from the opening scene of this episode who was being tortured. So far in the show, they love to do this where their opening scene is a bit of a time jump from the events as the episode unfolds normally post intro credits. So the timeline here can be a bit confusing, but this is before Takumi is being tortured and interrogated, and the two of them walk up to him inside of the shop. Takumi has a thing for Mixie, and the whole interaction between them is awkward in this scene. You can see that Mixie is using that to her advantage to manipulate him to get answers, and part of me kind of feels for the guy, you know? He's like that permanent friend zone, but he's also kind of a creep, and I don't know. He's working at an adult toy store, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but then he's like making personalized recommendations to her. The two of them have a back and forth, and I felt very uncomfortable watching it. This is when Susie gets involved and asks him a elusive question about whether the toys come with their own Dark Manual code. And we see yet again that similar reaction of, you know, oh my goodness, and they kind of sneak off to the back, and he asks her, are you trying to get me in trouble? Luckily, with some quick thinking from Sunny and Mixie, they're able to assure him, no, like they just want to get the good stuff, quote unquote. Takumi reluctantly says that even if he wanted to help them, he doesn't have any code on his person, and says that if he weren't working there tonight, he would wine and dine Mixie at an establishment called Wanted, and that he would ask for someone named Tendo. This is all of the information that our characters manage to get off of him before they set off to go find Wanted. When the two show up, they find out that it is a host club, in Susie's words. It's like a it looks almost like a stripper bar kind of thing. It's like a nightclub. And the host there asks Susie, which man would she like? Just take any man. Before they eventually say that they're there for Tendo, and his eyes light up and he leads them to a room in the back. As they're walking through these back hallways, we get some very off-putting noises of robots and rhythmic timing, if you catch my drift, as well as some moaning. And we kind of get an idea of what's taking place in the back rooms of this facility. And Susie and Mixie's expression on their face gets increasingly more concerned the farther they go with the man leading them. We then cut back to Takumi at his shop, where the man that was trailing Susie earlier in the truck walks inside, and we can see that Takumi is instantly frightened when the man says, you've had visitors. So presumably meeting with Susie is exactly what gets him in trouble and leads him to get tortured and interrogated later on, which we saw in the opening scene. We then see the mysterious woman from the opening scene holding a camera in her hands and watching Susie at the host club as she's being led to the back, and she tells someone to inform Tendo of what to do with them when they arrive. Susie and Mixie get led into a room where they finally get to meet the infamous Tendo, who's on the phone and is like, I haven't seen anybody, I don't know what you're talking about, never mind, they just walked in. So clearly he's just gotten the message on what to do, and he asks if they're there to see the robot fighting and tells them there's a cover charge of 1,000,000 yen. But he also asks the caller on the phone which woman they want and says that Susie is the only one allowed to go and Mixie has to stay behind. Outside of the host club, a man approaches Sunny, who was not allowed to walk in with Susie and Mixie to meet Tendo, and says, come on, your master's waiting for you. To which Sunny responds, Susie? Susie sent you? And the man says, of course. And I'm like, bro, this is stranger etiquette 101. You never provide them with the name of the person. You always ask ahead of time, hey, who sent you? What's the name of my boss? But I guess Sunny is only like a couple weeks old and also a robot, so it tends to be more on the innocent side of things. So she follows the man back into the club. After her interaction with Tendo, Susie is led by a different man through some corridors and down some stairs into a giant underground room where these people are having robot fights and betting on them for money. It's like if the BattleBots show that you could watch on TV was illegal and they had to have it like publicly in underground rooms. That's exactly what's going on here. When Susie gets to the front of the circle, she sees that there are these decked out robots that are clearly designed for combat or homeBots that have been altered who begin to fight. And at some point in their fight, a drunken man says no and walks out into the ring, and Susie gasps, concerned for his well-being, obviously, as they're like shooting around spike balls and knives and flamethrowers, before being reassured by a crowd member to relax, they can't hurt people, which at least in the moment we do see is true. One of the robots is swinging around this like spike ball, and when it's about to hit the drunken man who walked into the ring, it stops and pulls the ball back in before a guard pulls the man out of the arena and they resume combat as normal. I forgot to mention that right before the robots started fighting, the host / announcer for the event said something along the lines of Junk League, which was to initiate the fight. And this causes a flashback for Susie back to a time when Masa and Zen were fighting in a sumo style where they got her to say the very same words to initiate their fight. I don't know what significance this has other than to maybe insinuate a further connection to Masa and this robot fighting underground. Maybe he was the organizer of these events and that's why it was like the similar starting phrase, or at least he had been in attendance or possibly even put in his own robots to compete, maybe for some extra money. Ultimately, the battle concludes and there is a definitive winner, and they're getting ready to start the next battle, and they bring in like a champion and they pit him up against some newcomer, and when they flash over, we see that it's none other than Sunny, who's looking around confused with no idea what's going on, but has been ushered in by the man that met them outside. Susie obviously is not about to watch her homebot that she's built this relationship with get eviscerated in a death combat, and jumps in to stop things, which is when the mysterious woman and the man that we've seen in the previous episode spying on Susie walk into the ring together, and the woman says, no, your bot is going to compete. When Susie tries to leave, the woman pushes her back into the ring, which sets Sunny off, who actually then pushes the woman, which causes her prosthetic pinky ring finger thing to fly off onto the ground, where everyone turns and looks at it. And this awkward encounter is enough of a distraction for Sunny and Susie to run out of the ring. Not before Susie steps on the little prosthetic finger. And just when the spy we've seen in the previous episodes goes to set off and chase the two of them, the woman stops him and picks up her crumpled up prosthetic and lets them get away. So with that scene, we have a full timeline of events that pieces together what's happening in the opening scene of episode 3. This woman had her fake finger crumpled and went to the nail salon to get a replacement. And for whatever reason, we're also interrogating Takumi there from the adult toy store. I'm not sure if they were just multitasking their businesses and brought him there to torture him while she got her finger done, or if maybe there's some connection between Takumi and the nail salon. But now we know why she was there, and now we know why the man was being tortured. Sunny and Susie make it outside of the club and meet Mixie, who was there waiting for them, and she asks if everything was okay. And Susie responds, no, I think Masa was the... and then vomits on the ground because it was just too much action and all the anxiety. It kind of leaves us in the dark. We're like, Masa was the what? And again, I speculated earlier on maybe he was the orchestrator of the underground robot fights, but we never learn what Susie was going to say here or what revelation she learned by her experience down there with the strange woman and the robot fighting. Because as she is getting sick, we then cut forward to the next day and the funeral that's being held for Masa. We see a priest chanting and ringing a bell in front of a picture of Masa in front of a crowd of people that have shown up to pay their respects. But all of a sudden, our mysterious woman and presumably crime boss from the episode shows up to pay their respects as well, eerily walking to the front to kneel down and look at Susie eye to eye. Susie is obviously concerned at what this could mean and the fact that this woman is now following her, and I believe starts to understand the gravity of the situation, and that is where we come to the closing credits. So I really liked this week's episode. I thought that the pacing was great. We obviously got to learn a little bit bit more information about the organization that we've been talking about in the previous 2 podcast episodes that has been tailing Susie. And while we still don't know what their intentions are, we know that they are certainly formidable and capable of some violence. One of the other questions that this week opened up was who exactly the mysterious woman's father is. We know that he's sick and in the hospital and that she's kind of leading in his place. And we also start to get an idea of how big their network is, obviously introducing the truck driver spy as well as Tendo at the nightclub and this intricate weaving of, people that are involved in this thing. We also got some development for Mixie as a character and the relationship to Susie. Now she's kind of in the thick of it, in the mess as well. And I think in the next week's episode, we're really going to start to get some more of these answers to the questions that we've been asking. But that'll about wrap it up for this week's episode. If you guys have any questions or comments of your own, please do join the discussion in the comment section down below, because I would love to know what you guys thought of episode 3. Also, if you guys would like to stay up to date and informed on what to watch next, you can follow us on all socials at ShowSleuthPod is our handle on everything. I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons, those who have gone above and beyond to support this production. As a reminder, for just $5 a month, you guys can support us over on Patreon, and the link for that is in the description. So shout out to our assistant directors. Once again, you all did some damn fine detective work this week, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.